Welcome to the show, everybody. I am fucking giddy right now. I'm sorry if I just lost some listeners by dropping an F-bomb this early on, but I am really giddy because today's guest is somebody that I've been tracking down for a short while, but ever since tracking him down, I have absolutely been ecstatic, and I've been trying and hounding him. Even I've had my assistants, going after him, and then we had some delays getting back and forth due to his publisher. And I just went direct back on Twitter again, like, let's make this happen. We need to do it now. And thankfully, Seamus was able to make it happen. Seamus Bruner is my guest today. Follow him on Twitter. He is an excellent follow. That's how I found out about him. And he's an author and somebody who has a similar trajectory to me, but somebody who's really taken a deep dive into the shit no one wants to look at. And he has a brand new book that is out now called Controligarchs. Beautiful title, by the way. Exposing the billionaire class, their secret deals, and the globalist plot to dominate your life. This book is one of the most important reads that I've read in the last 3 years. And y'all know what I've been reading in the last 3 years. The reason I say that is because, there's a few reasons. One, it connects the dots between so many names that we've heard throughout the past. We've heard names like the Rockefellers get thrown out there, George Soros, Bill Gates, different things like that. And what it shows is the interconnectivity of the play between all these players in the game and what they're actually trying to accomplish. There's all of chapter 5, which is a massive chapter, is all on what's happening with our food system. And so you might be saying, why do I want to listen to this? Why do I want to read this? And what's great is that the forward's by Peter Schweizer, also a phenomenal author, who I'm going to have on the podcast thanks to Seamus. And one of the things that he points to is that the intention of the book is not fear. It's not fear porn. It's not clickbait. It's not, ooh, wow, look at this. The sky is falling, chicken little shit. The intention of this is that awareness is the only thing necessary for us to understand the game that is at play and to reclaim, simply by stepping up, by reclaiming the power that is inherently always resided with we the people. And I find that inspiring and true at the same time. And, there's really, I've gone both ways on this subject. I've spent a little too much time looking in the dark, but Seamus wrote this book absolutely beautifully. He did it without judgment. He did it without blame in terms of, what's happened within the populace over the last few years, but he just lays it out, and he lays it out in such an easy to digest way. It's incredibly important. If I was to say, of all the books that I recommend, Mark Gaffney talks about the difference between a role mate, a soulmate, and a whole mate. And without getting into role mate and soulmate, which I think we understand, the difference between a soulmate and a whole mate is that a whole mate stands arm in arm with their soulmates, their brothers, their sisters, their husbands and wives, whoever they have on the squad, and they view a shared horizon. What does that mean? That means we look out into the world and we see the same thing. We see the truth of where we're at. We see the truth of what we've done to our planet. We see the truth of all the fuckery and shenanigans, and we collectively put our hearts together and our minds together and solve the issues at hand. In order for that to happen, we must see the game as it is actually being played, and this is one of the most detailed, truthful, and awesome, and I've verified there's so many chapters where I've spent entire books and hours studying on Bill Gates and his father and the lineage that those guys come from. Soros was somebody who I had no idea about other than hearing of the Nazi Germany background from his father and things like that. But when this gets laid out, it's done in a way that isn't scary, but there's a holy shit moment. So I just want to prep you for that. We don't dive too far into the weeds into his book because I want you guys to buy this. I want you guys to buy it and read it for yourself. I think it's super important. I don't know how long it's going to be on Amazon, so I would order it fast, to be perfectly honest, but it's a very important read. It's one of the most important reads that we could possibly understand right now, so that we do have the shared horizon, that we are able to look out into the world and understand what it is that we're up against and the best way forward through that. And so I love Seamus. I'm super grateful for his work, super grateful that he took time with me. He mentions it on the podcast, but we're the first podcast he did in promoting this, so very excited. Also incredibly excited to introduce him to Aubrey Marcus and Paul Check and a lot of people on the squad that have bigger followings than I do to help spread the word. So share this podcast far and wide. Share it with people that are like-minded individuals, that are freedom fighters and people who have had their heads screwed on straight in the last 3 years. Otherwise, they're probably not going to get very far in it, to be perfectly honest. If you don't consider yourself one of those things and you're listening to this podcast, if you're still listening to this podcast, I can assure you it is worth your listen. It is worth your listen to understand really what the world actually looks like and what some of these longer term plays in politics have been, why they have been, and what they're trying to accomplish. So without further ado, my brother, Seamus Bruner. Did I say that right?
Yes, sir. Seamus.
Seamus. I love it, man. I had Sean O'Leara, if I'm saying it right. He was a Irish Catholic priest for 48 years in Ireland. And he's got a brother named Seamus. And it was right when I got a hold of this book, Controligarchs, which is in the background of your screen there. And I was so pumped. I was like, oh, that's a nice little synchronicity there. He's got a brother named Seamus. I got a guy coming on. I assumed you were American, but got the Irish background, yeah?
Yep, that's right. Seamus is James in Gaelic. Sean is John. I'm James Jr., but my parents called me Seamus since birth. So
that's cool.
It kind of stuck.
Yeah, that's cool. I was telling Sean, I have my grandmother was 100% Irish. My mom's mom, Betty Riley. So it was cool to see a little connection there. Your book, I mean, I don't just dive right in. We've been following each other on Twitter, which is great because I was off Twitter for a while, just fucking like right before the pandemic hit. I was like, fuck all this. I just read Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. And I was like, I'm out. Canceled all the shit, got off of it. And about 6 months into the pandemic, I was like, it's actually kind of a good way to talk to people. And I fucked that up. Twitter let me back on with all my followers, which was great. But one of the things that I always appreciated about it was the fact that he could, someone would pop up in my feed and be like, this guy's great. I got to follow him, and they could reach out right there. And mostly, I don't respond to shit on Instagram, but if somebody hits me in my inbox on Twitter, I'm like, yeah, man, I'll fucking respond to you right there. So that was cool getting to get a hold of you there and also see, what you're about. Like you can see that fairly clearly if it's, with the succinct, at least in the old days when it was 140 characters, you got to make it brief and to the point, what you're trying to talk about, what you're linking towards, what your stance is. And I really appreciated everything. When I got a hold of Controligarchs, which is your book is it out now or coming out shortly?
Yeah, it's out. It's
yeah.
Yep. Yep. You
amazing.
can get it everywhere.
So we'll link to this in the show notes, but when I got a hold of it, the thing that blew my mind is that I've seen, a documentary on the Rockefellers. I've rabbit holed with Mickey Willis off air, everything about Gates's dad and his connection to Planned Parenthood and the whole eugenics background. And I've heard a lot about Soros, but it's kind of like one of those names like Rockefeller, where I'm just like, well, the name gets tossed out, by Alex Jones and different people all the time, but it never really a deep dive on him. And what I really appreciated is that you go bit by bit, chapter by chapter, you lay this out in a way that's congruent. It brings us up to date, but it pulls in the whole cast of characters that are often sometimes hard to really grasp how these guys intertwine. Like I think people have they ask themselves the question, is there really some group of bad guys twisting their mustache, in some underground den somewhere? Probably not. But when you connect the dots the way that you do and you show like sometimes they're on the same team, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're competitive, sometimes they help each other out, with Soros and Tesla. Sometimes these guys get screwed with Soros and Rivian, like it's a much more real understanding of how these things have gone on. And really when we get the history lesson, which is the most brilliant piece of this all, the history lesson makes sense of it. You can start to understand like kind of how our medical system got funneled into a certain direction, how the pharmaceutical system was from the jump heading in that same direction by design. And much of the other things here, you also had a massive chapter on food, which, as you know, I do regenerative agriculture on small scale, but it's something I'm very passionate about. And food as a health and wellness guy, that's really that's the holy grail. That's it. That's what it boils down to. And if you take that from us or start to force feed us in a certain direction around cell-based meat and other things, I love that you didn't take anything off the table in this, and it's awesome. And I'd love to dive into that. But first, I'm getting long-winded here, but first I always want to know, like, what was the background? Like, what drove you to become you? We do it on every podcast, and I can't leave that out. And then I want to dive into your book. Tell me, what was life like growing up, and what drove you to get into the position that you're in today?
Yeah, well, it is great to be with you, and I'm glad you really sunk your teeth into this. And I just appreciate the kind words you just said. It really does cover everything from food to health to just the technology, the information, and the word control just kept coming back before I even had the title. And so anyway, but my background is I went to Florida State University, go Seminoles, and studied political science. Thought I might want to get into politics. I studied Mandarin, took four semesters, I think, of Mandarin. Thought I might want to go be a lobbyist for China, if you can believe it. So I was I was misguided in college, and then I
voted for Bernie in 2016 in the primaries. So we can all lose our way when we don't understand the whole picture. I get that.
Yeah, and so I get a job while I'm still in college, volunteering for this gentleman who's really my hero and mentor, Peter Schweizer, who has been an author for 30 years or so. And I started working on his books. And the first one I worked on was called Throw Them All Out, and just doing research. I mean, no formal training in this follow the money research that we do really well, if I do say so. I mean, so Throw Them All Out broke the insider trading scandal in Congress. Stock queen Nancy Pelosi. There are a bunch of other guys and women, congresswomen in there, and we go after both sides. I mean, we go after the Republicans, the Democrats, and we found that the corruption in Congress was just staggering. 60 Minutes did a few pieces with Schweizer, and that was where I learned, okay, I don't want to go into politics, and eventually learned China, I don't want to be a lobbyist for China either. So that was over a decade ago. I've been working for Schweizer ever since. The Clinton Cash book was probably my favorite project that we worked on, and that was what blew the lid off the Clinton Foundation. I went through every single Clinton Foundation 990. That's the
All right, sorry, we had a technical difficulty there that split us off for a second. We were just talking about Nancy Pelosi and how really the work that you guys were doing with Schweizer was geared towards both sides, because we see fuckery everywhere. So continue from there, please.
Right. So that was when I realized that politics is a very sleazy business that I wanted no part of, and it's much more fun to be on the outside exposing these politicians. And so the next book really that really excited me was called Clinton Cash, and that was what blew the lid off of the Clinton Foundation pay-to-play scheme. And that's where I really cut my teeth in going through financial disclosures. I went through the IRS 990 tax filings of the Clinton Foundation. I mean, thousands and thousands of pages of all of their donors, found all the foreign governments, Saudi Arabia, found all the Ukraine money that was going into the Clinton Foundation, but also saw a lot of these corporate interests. You've got the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a huge donor to the Clinton Foundation, and a lot of the corporations that are members of the World Economic Forum. But I'm a capitalist, so I didn't think too much about that. Obviously, there's some pay to play going on, but I didn't really see the agenda behind it all. The next book was Secret Empires, and then there was Profiles in Corruption, and then Red Handed. Those are all three Schweizer books that were all #1 bestsellers. And those books blew the lid off of the Biden family corruption. This would be the Ukraine and the China. I mean, we were the first to report about the CEFC energy company that was, bribery is what's been alleged, but at least funneling huge sums of cash to the Biden family, not just Hunter, but brother Jim, and we may see eventually made its way to Joe. And so those were the last Schweizer books that I worked on. He's got a new one coming out in January. I'll tell him he's got to come on your show to break it. But I started to really think about, like, how does all this corruption go on? Like, how is this allowed? And that's when I did my first book. It's called Compromised: How Money and Politics Drive FBI Corruption. I had this theory that the Department of Justice and the subsidiary FBI is really where all roads lead to with political corruption. I mean, if the DOJ doesn't prosecute you, you can get away with it. And we find the political class is very often, almost never actually, they're never prosecuted. They're very often allowed to get away with it. I mean, there's these special conflict of interest waivers that we saw the Clintons get. There's all kinds of ways that the DOJ can basically allow legal graft. It should be illegal, but it's basically legalized bribery. And so that was the DOJ book, and there's a lot of problems I think people can see at the DOJ all the way through today. I think unless we clean up the DOJ, clean up the FBI, these guys are going to keep getting away with it. My second book was called Fallout, and I'm really proud of that book because it basically predicted the situation happening in Ukraine with Russia. It was called Fallout: Nuclear Bribes, Russian Spies, and the Washington Lies that enriched the Clinton and Biden dynasties. And so that sort of put the final finishing touches on the Clinton and Biden corruption, in my view. I mean, we've known for years how corrupt the Clintons and the Bidens are, and specifically in this situation in Ukraine. I mean, one of Hillary Clinton's biggest foundation donors was Viktor Pinchuk. He's this Ukrainian oligarch. She got a ton of money from Ukraine, and of course, Biden through Burisma got a ton of money in Ukraine. And I could just see this collision course happening. It's like, unless we have a new strategy where we're not using Ukraine as this sort of puppet state to wage proxy war with Russia, we're going to be heading for a big conflict with a nuclear armed power. I think we see that today as Putin's test firing nuclear rockets. So, but it was in Ukraine that I came across really the first oligarch where I was like, all right, this guy's a bad dude and he's worthy of exposure, and that would be George Soros, of course. Now, I've heard of George Soros probably since I was 12 years old, and he's the right-wing boogeyman, but he really is up to no good all around the world. He helps overthrow democratically elected leaders through his color revolution strategy. I talk about that. That's in the Soros chapter of this Controligarchs book. But then I started seeing, more names. You got Bill Gates that are regular donors to these politicians. And what I came to realize is that the politicians are largely just figureheads. I mean, a lot of the policies that they cook up and they put out and the ones that dominate our lives. I mean, the pandemic was where this book was really conceived. I mean, during the pandemic, it was like, wow. Like, I mean, who would have thought that they could lock you in your home in America or fire you from your job unless you inject yourself with a drug that has no long-term side effect studies? I mean, we still don't know the long-term side effects of the mRNA vaccinations. And the indications are it's not good. And it's certainly, I mean, I think it's downright evil to force somebody to take a drug that they don't want. And so that's where I was like, okay, these guys got to be exposed. It's not the politicians. It's not. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez goes out there and says that cow farts are going to end the planet in 12 years, I mean, she didn't just think that up. That came from a white paper that, put out by a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Usually 10, 20 years before the politicians even enact the policies, you have these billionaire oligarchs. I call them the Controligarchs. They're funding the studies. And it's obviously not about saving the planet. There's a commercial interest in all of that. And so I get into that in the book. The commercial interest, in my view, is the patents. The patents are a 20-year-long monopoly that the patent holder has on a particular product. So, with the food stuff, well, we can get into all the patents in a minute if you want, but that's basically my background. I've been with Schweizer for 10 years, love the work here, and have no intention of stopping following the money and exposing these guys.
Well, you're doing great. Yeah, one of the chapters is follow the money. Well, I want to go piece by piece through this, but yeah, it's absolutely fantastic work, and I think that was the real hair raiser for me was 2020, because prior to that, I kind of still saw like the old angry ex-military guy who hated the government as that guy. He's just the old angry ex-military guy who doesn't trust anyone. He doesn't, not that he doesn't just trust the government, he doesn't trust anybody. You're like, all right, he's a crotchety old shit. Maybe something bad happened to him. And that's that. And then, 2020 happens, and it seemed like this giant explosion of access to books like this, like that, where I could just start to piece together shit. And I was like, all this shit's been around. Like some of these books have been around for like 30 years, and then I'm looking like, damn, how come I never read that? And I was like, well, there's never was a real interest in those things until there was a point where you could no longer look away. Like if it's so in your face, like, okay, this is how much they're controlling the world. You can't do shit. And most people that have real jobs, they're forced to behave a certain way. And if they don't, they're castrated financially, and you dive into that. Obviously, the hammer really was thrown by Trudeau, which is brilliant because it showed the level of the game that we're playing. Right. And we understand this Australia, New Zealand, anywhere where you have like, it's World Economic Forum's got their hands in everything, but when it's the head honcho, you can see they're a bit stricter in places like that. First world countries, free nations, you'd suppose. So I think with all that was like my real eye opener that we're past the point of totalitarian tiptoe. Like now we're seeing a full court press, and I think it's because the technology's there. I'll get your opinion on that, like why now kind of deal. But I'd love to go through just piece by piece and say as much as you want, say as little as you want. I'm going to say right now for the listeners, we're going to go through this piece by piece, chapter by chapter. But there's no way in an hour we cover even a tenth of what's in this book. It's absolutely mind blowing. You reference a lot of things in here and show the details on where to find out more. So I highly encourage everybody. This is a must read. And when I say must read, like there's many books that I've come across where I was like, that was one of my favorites. Setting God Free, Sean Allaire. One of the best books on religion of all time. And this is something that you need to read right now. Controligarchs is something that you have to read right now because you have to understand that there is a game that's being played, and it hasn't stopped because the pandemic ended and we got to go back to the new normal. That's all bullshit. The world has changed forever, and there's a push here with Agenda 2030. There's a push here to change things in a rapid way. So let's dive in. Let's just backtrack. We'll start at chapter 1. Tell me about the Rockefellers. Most people have this idea, especially if they're from New York, about how, John D was an asshole and a monopoly guy, and then he decided to become a philanthropist, and he built these buildings, and he donated all this money, and he became a really, New York's hero kind of deal. But nobody liked the guy. He wasn't a good guy. So dive into that history there, because I find this, it's glaringly obvious when you connect the pieces here, but I'd love to go through it with you. Tell me about the Rockefellers, please.
Right. So, and I didn't intend for this book at all to be a history book, but I'm a root cause analysis guy. I got to go back to the beginning and see where all of this started. And so I kept bumping into, I'm looking at the current, I'm looking at the pandemic stuff. You get into the Operation Lockstep, where the Rockefeller Foundation puts out this document in 2010. It's a full decade before COVID-19. And it spells out a pandemic that results in lockdowns. And everybody's got to stay locked down until there's a vaccine. And we really need to control the narrative. You see that over and over and over again with these. They do these war games. These oligarchs do these war games. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum. I'm sure you've covered, the one that happened 3 weeks or so before the pandemic. But anyway, so there's this kind of war game document that the Rockefeller Foundation puts out. That was where they really ended up on my radar. Because, yeah, like you said, I thought, the oligarchs of the past, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, those types, the Vanderbilts, that was actually part of the pitch on this project, is like the new oligarchs, the big tech guys, the Bill Gates and the Zuckerberg and the Bezos, they're not like the old oligarchs. The old oligarchs just wanted to build hospitals and schools and libraries. And so they're the good oligarchs, and the new ones are the bad ones. But then, as I looked deeper and deeper into the Rockefeller history, I was like, man, they have been actually controlling public health for over 100 years. They John D, by the way, Senior, the oil man, the way I see it is John D. Rockefeller, he created this brilliant system for, getting oil out of the ground. He had and by the way, they mastered the patent process. And that's a recurring theme throughout this book, is how patents basically grant you a monopoly for 20 years. And then then it becomes a kind of open source and everybody can use the method. Standard Oil had thousands of patents on how to get oil out of the ground, how to store it, how to move it, how to refine it. And so John D. Sr. was, brilliant. And he comes up with this process that makes him probably, one of the richest families in history. But then, as you see with offspring of very wealthy people, it's enormous shoes to fill for John D. Jr. And then when you move into the third generation, for David Rockefeller, who's, this Council on Foreign Relations guy, the Rockefeller that more people are familiar with, the contemporary Rockefeller, who's got the really sinister agenda. And you see clips of him at, Bilderberg conferences, or, he's really actually kind of a World Economic Forum precursor. But anyway, so it all starts really is when John D. Jr., has these enormous shoes to fill. He's never going to be a better oil man than his father. And so what is he going to do? Well, he's going to be the best philanthropist. And so he, at a very young age, gets put in charge of the Rockefeller fortune. And there's this guy, Gates, who's a Baptist preacher. He's no relation to Bill Gates, but Frederick T. Gates, who they find through the University of Chicago, which the Rockefeller family has funded for a century. And Gates becomes the guy who's going to help give away this money. There's a quote in the book. He says, "Your money is growing so fast that like an avalanche, it will crush you. And so you've got to start giving away your money as fast as you can because you're making it faster than you can spend it." And so that's when the Rockefeller Foundation is created. There's all sorts of kind of sub-foundations. One of them was the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which is now Rockefeller University in Manhattan. And so this Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, that's when they start getting into vaccines. And I was like, whoa, like they're studying viruses 100 years ago. And you see, I mean, from the Spanish flu, the last pandemic that was a global pandemic, all the way through polio and all of these diseases, the Rockefellers are right there trying to figure out cures. Now, you'd think that's a really good thing, right? I mean, polio is a bad disease, and having a cure for it is a good thing. So, a lot of the vaccines they created and helped fund and helped, create smallpox and yellow fever and malaria and all these kinds of attempts to save human life are good. But what you find is they realized over time that they basically took over the entire public health department of whole countries. They'd go into Brazil or they'd go into countries in Africa. And because the governments had no solution for a lot of these terrible diseases, the Rockefeller Foundation would operate as a quasi-governmental entity. And they would go and then they'd do a lot of studying. And it gave them an enormous amount of power. When you come into a country and say, I can help you with your health problems, the government will basically give you the keys to the kingdom. And eventually that becomes very profitable because Standard Oil is still a thing and you need to get oil out of the ground in a lot of countries, Venezuela and all around the world. So their private money continued to grow at a massive rate. And then they just spend a fraction of it on the philanthropic endeavors. But yeah, so I mean, through the 20th century, they're working on all these diseases, which makes them kind of central to the 2020 pandemic. Or the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, everybody takes their cues from them. I actually found I was looking. I was like, how does Gates and Rockefeller come together? Because you don't really get any photos of them in the room together. But yeah, you mentioned Bill Gates Sr., the dad, who, by the way, I think is the real brains behind everything from Microsoft to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And there are plenty of indicators of that. I mean, his dad, Bill Sr., was the chairman of the Gates Foundation. His mom is the one who got Bill Jr., the Bill we know today, a partnership with IBM. Before Microsoft is a nothing company until it has this partnership with IBM making operating systems, which, by the way, the Windows operating system, I mean, it wasn't just cribbed in a lot of ways from Apple. It was, Bill Gates has admitted we actually cribbed it from Xerox. So Bill Gates hasn't coded a computer program since like the 70s or 80s. So he's not this like genius computer programmer that he makes himself out to be. They bought it. They bought it or stole a lot of it. I mean, I'm not going to take all the, I'm not going to say he's nothing. I mean, he is certainly a brilliant guy, but it's not like he's coding your Windows laptops. Hasn't done that in a very, very long time. Anyway, so the connection to Rockefeller is through Bill Sr. He was a board of directors member of the National Planned Parenthood organization all the way back in the 60s. And this is at a time when Planned Parenthood existed. This is, the largest abortion provider in the United States. Planned Parenthood existed it was founded as a eugenics organization. We need to weed out the poor, the mentally handicapped. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, she famously said, the Black population needs to be pulled out root and branch like weeds. And so the organization, these birth control organizations from the 20s right up through really World War II, because then eugenics gets associated with the Nazis and it's very toxic. But it doesn't stop the desires of these folks to remove undesirable elements of the gene pool or of the population in their view. And by the way, the Rockefellers gave Margaret Sanger all of the seed money. Most of the Rockefeller family members, I found this in one of their biographies, which is very hard to find, were Planned Parenthood and its predecessor, the Birth Control League. They were major donors, all of them, going back to the 1920s. And John D. Jr. definitely had some eugenic views, and that it started that way. But when you get up through the 1960s, there's this very popular idea, and you hear it still today. I mean, it became so popular amongst the elites and their foundations that even today, you ask somebody if they're going to have kids, and they say, "No, I don't think having kids for me," or "No, I want to save the planet, so I'm not going to have kids." It's this idea of overpopulation. And so that's really what chapter 1 is about. I mean, I would have said 5 years ago, population control, that's a conspiracy theory maybe. But you look into it and the history's there. They're proud of it. You can pull up the Rockefeller Foundation annual reports going back 150 to 100 years. And in there, population control efforts are a huge priority for the foundation. And this is where we get to climate change, by the way. Because overpopulation, it kind of has this sinister, okay, if you think the global population is getting too large, what's the solution? And they say, oh, we'll have less babies. Well, that's not happening. It's still getting bigger. And they'll never say, oh, well, we need to wipe out the population. I mean, they'll not often will they say that. I think Prince Andrew, some other elites, Jane Goodall at the World Economic Forum said that a billion people is the ideal world population. How do you get to 1 billion people? And why are you trying to save so many lives with your vaccination programs if you think the world's overpopulated? That's a tricky one. Ted Turner has said that we need, Ted Turner, CNN founder and billionaire, he's in the book, has said that maybe 1 billion, maybe 2 billion tops. But that idea was popularized in the 50s and the 60s. The Rockefeller Foundation was central to it. They funded Planned Parenthood. Some of the guys that Bill Gates Sr. would have been colleagues with at Planned Parenthood are major Rockefeller Foundation grant recipients. And they have this group called the Population Council. And they put out all these crazy reports in the 60s. And I got it all in the book where, how do we bring down that? Maybe we put some birth control, fertility control agents in the water supply. I mean, I'm not alleging that they actually followed through with that, but it was certainly an idea they talked about. I was we'll lower the fertility rate. And we have seen a huge drop in the fertility rate since the 1960s. So, I mean, they've been wildly successful in their desire to bring the population growth rate down. I mean, it's still growing, but a lot of Western countries are below the rate of replacement. I mean, a man and a woman need to have 2 children in order to carry on the species. And it's below that rate, it's below 2, 1.7, 1.6. France has got a really low birth rate. You see people having 1 kid, maybe 2, no kids a lot of times. And it's at that same time, by the way, that a lot of this transgender ideology comes up. I mean, there's actually a Rockefeller-funded report where it says encourage homosexuality. That's a good way to lower the population growth rate is let's encourage homosexuality. Of course, when you're snipping the bits of kids, they're not going to be having any kids down the line. So the Rockefellers actually did fund a guy, John Money, who is the godfather of transgender ideology. And he, had this experiment with it's a famous experiment called the Reamer twins, where 2 twins were, 2 boy twins were born, and one of them, a botched circumcision left him with a messed up member. And so they the parents bring these twins to the best doctor in the country, Johns Hopkins University. And John Money, he says, well, the solution here is to just take the whole thing off and raise him as your daughter. And raise him as a female. And he had, he came up with a lot of the gender as a spectrum. Another guy is the Rockefellers funded. I'm blanking on his name at the moment, but
Kinsey.
Kinsey, yeah, the Kinsey scale. They were big benefactors for Kinsey, and they come up with this concept that so they raised the twins. One of them is a girl, one of them is a boy. Well, both the twins, were so scarred. They tragically committed suicide. I think one of the moms committed suicide. One of them overdosed. One of the twins overdosed. The other committed suicide. The mom committed suicide. How do you live with yourself when you bring him to a crazy doctor like that? But I don't know. I mean, I might be going too much into the detail here. The point is, today, a lot of the stuff you see today was born in the 60s. They realized maybe by the 70s, this is when you get into the global warming, global cooling. We're running out of resources. The Earth is a spaceship and it's got finite resources. So I present, I think, enough evidence in the book that the whole climate change thing is really born out of the overpopulation thing, but that doesn't have a good brand. It's not a good brand. Overpopulation, I mean, people start to ask questions like, well, what do we do about that? Climate change is perfect. I mean, eventually they arrive at climate change. And first of all, you can take a ton of money from the taxpayers. I've documented over $1 trillion in Western country, have taken from taxpayers to put into these climate programs that don't act. I mean, it's a money laundering operation in a lot of ways. And then it brings us also back to the patent. So that's chapter one, is how we get from overpopulation to climate change.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I don't mind you going rabbit hole in that topic as well, because a lot of people, you might be able to say like, all right, fine, you've described medicine or one aspect of everyday life, but it's really, and a big part of this is Soros too, but the culture war that's at play, the divide and conquer, a lot of the shit, the ideology that's presented today. I found it fascinating researching Mao, from China, and finding out what he had done, and they talk about this in Plandemic 3. They have a video footage, which is great, where they would cut the boys and the girls' hair the exact same, put them in androgynous clothes, really got rid of the nuclear family, said you could report your parents if they weren't, for Mao. And a lot of the kids who did unknowingly, they'd watch, the troops come in and behead their father right in front of them or shoot them in the head. And so like, shit, that's how it went down, but we're so far removed from that. And I think a lot of people, I've said it for many times, which I think Jordan Peterson first brought up, was like World War II happened yesterday. Fucking blink of an eye, but we were born at a time where there's no major wars. They're all outside the US, that kind of thing. And so people have a hard time connecting the dots, especially here compared to Europe and other places that have seen it firsthand. But same thing, like Mao was yesterday. It was just right around the corner, like where the game of control and how that was implemented to make men and women androgynous was done by design. It was done by design to take away sexism and to take away the warrior ethos of a father, of a child, of a man, of a boy becoming a man. And that's all trackable. So I love that you throw that in there, because I think, especially with Kinsey, he was a weird fucking guy. He was doing some really weird experiments, and they show him on TV in this kind of, brilliant light of what he did for sexuality and things like that. And it's like, no, there's a sinister side to that too. So I really appreciate the depth that you get into that.
Well, yeah, and it's really sinister. And the Rockefeller Foundation, right on their website, you can go find a page called "Funding the Sexual Revolution." They're very proud of it. What was happening at this time is they were funding a lot of drugs, a lot of fertility control agents, the birth control pills, and abortifacient pills, the pills that are not birth control. They actually kill the fetus, up to several weeks along. It's called RU-486. And there's an interesting part in that where that was actually developed in concert with the Nazi eugenicists. IG Farben was developing, different chemicals that could more, kill people faster. And this drug RU-486, now it's known as mifepristone, and it's actually headed to the Supreme Court. They may be reviewing it as we speak. The Texas filed suit against the FDA saying that this drug should not be available as easily as it is. I mean, any young girl can go and get this abortifacient pill that kills the fetus. It's an enormously profitable drug. I mean, just like the abortion industry is enormously profitable. So you see these ideological themes where the overpopulation or climate change and all this stuff, you think that they may be true believers, but then you go and look at, okay, I actually traced it back, and this is one of the hugest, in my opinion, unreported stories that comes from the book, is that this RU-486 abortion pill is owned by, they couldn't figure out. First of all, it was developed by the Nazis. The Rockefellers took over development for commercial use as an abortion pill. The Population Council of the Rockefeller Foundation develops it. They have this crony relationship with the FDA. As you can imagine, I mean, the Rockefeller, it basically tells the FDA what to do, Rockefeller Foundation. And so the FDA approves Bill Clinton, on his first day in office, became the most pro-abortion president that we've ever had. They approve this drug for civilian women to use across the country. It becomes wildly, successful, but they sort of reverse merge it. So they use these tax exempt resources through the Rockefeller Foundation to develop this drug. And then they sort of reverse merge it into a for-profit entity. It's called Danco, DANCO Labs. And when it came out, this is in the 90s, you go back and look at the New York Times for Danco Labs, and the New York Times, like, nobody seems to know. It's funny. Today you see it's like, okay, the Rockefellers developed it, and now nobody knows who the for-profit entity is, who owns it. But somehow back in the 90s, people would read that, mysterious. New York Times, nobody seems to know. All they have is a P.O. box in Manhattan. I'm like, Manhattan, of course. I mean, that's where Rockefellers are based, Chase Manhattan Bank. But Danco Labs, it never really got widely reported who the investors are. It's a secret Cayman Island shell corporation. And it's made billions of dollars killing babies. And who are the investors? Well, it's like Warren Buffett is one of the investors. I've got them in the book. I don't want to name them just yet here. Actually, I've got it on a sheet of paper here. But in any case, it's the characters of this book, Warren Buffett, George Soros, and Rockefeller, who are profiting off this drug. And now the Supreme Court is, thanks to this Texas lawsuit, going to reveal if this, should be on the market for women. Right now, I believe it's on hold. And so you see a lot of, radical left pro-choice types like freaking out that this pill won't be available. It's the one that they will send you through the mail if you live in one of those backward red states that wants to protect life. Anyway, so that, there's a commercial element. Same thing with the transgender surgeries. There's a big pharma element to the hormone inhibitors and all of these kind of drugs that they're giving kids, kids who can't, a kid can't consent to a Tylenol. If they have a headache in middle school and you go to the nurse's office, you can't take a Tylenol without a parental consent, but they're trying to make it so that your child can basically sterilize themselves for like in an irreversible procedure with some of these drugs for the rest of their lives. So it's really sick stuff. And the sickest part is that they make money off of it in a lot of ways. So
you don't even have to have the surgery. If a kid goes on hormone replacement therapy with the opposite gender's hormones for 2 years or longer, they're not having kids. They can have surgery to remove breast tissue and things like that, but they're not going to be fertile for the rest of their lives. They've effectively, become a eunuch. They can't reproduce. That's a big one, and it's just 2 years. Like, think about that. If you're 8 years old and every kid in your class is doing it, and you're like, all right, I'll try this out. And then at 10, you're like, no, that's not for me. You get the whole rest of your life. You can't go back. That's gone. Even if you didn't get cut, that's just it's insane to me. It's absolutely insane.
So you look at this LGBTQ plus whatever movement, and you see that I think that the people are on the ground, the grassroots are truly believe it, but they don't realize that there are billionaires. And you mentioned earlier that you were a former Bernie bro. I wrote this book because a lot of my friends are Bernie bros, and there's this debate on the right or left. Or is it the evil corporations who are the bad guys, or is it the state who are the bad guys? And I wrote this book because, the evil corporations in bed with the state is like a recipe for disaster. I mean, it's called fascism. Ironically, the left is always screaming about fascism, but they're the most fascistic of all. The fact they're making a ton of money, but also controlling the population, every aspect of it. So I started with the health, but then we kind of move on through, the rest of the stuff, the food and the energy. I mean, the chapter 4, the energy. So that kind of grows out of this overpopulation. If you want to get into,
let's dive into that too, because I think Gates kind of emerges with that. We touched a little bit on his father. There's still plenty there. Schwab and the Great Reset. This is really like his time. It's like he had the book written before 2020 to just have I don't know if you've read it, but it's ridiculous. And knowing friends like Aubrey and different people, how long it takes to put a book out. Paul Check's been writing one for the last 2 years. Like, This dude just hit it.
In 2 weeks. He wrote it in like 2 weeks. I put the time frame because like the announcement, but it's really interesting, by the way, because the Great Reset, there's actually a Rockefeller Foundation report in like February of 2020 where it mentions the words Great Reset have been like, kicked around for a while. And the same thing with Build Back Better. Build Back Better goes back a decade, as in terms of a strategy. I think I might even found the first reference to Build Back Better in 2005 in a UN document. So I mean, these strategies are put in place well before the inciting event, which I don't take a position. I mean, you might be able to guess what I think, but I don't put opinions in the book. I don't take a position on if it's fully planned.
I love that too. I thought that was great because of the fact that like you leave that off the table and just lay the cards out where they are and let people decide for themselves. And I think it's a good thing because it doesn't push some people on the fence away. But let's drive in. Let's talk about smart homes, smart cities, the Internet of Things, because most people, they don't really grasp like what this actually means. When you think about what are the means in which you could have, a technocratic takeover where you're in an open air prison system. Catherine Austin Fitts talks about this amazingly well in Planet Lockdown, but a lot of people didn't watch that. A lot of people find it hard to believe that they could control every aspect of your life. They already had this, and you talked about it in the book. In Houston, I'm in fucking Austin, Texas, right? In Houston, they decided that they were going to raise everyone's temperatures in the middle of summer in the evening to help with electrical imbalances. And people had to deal with 86 degree temperatures in their house. Old people, young people, babies, that kind of thing. And they could just do that from a computer screen, and no one could change it. Right. So there's that one example of a million things here. My first inclination was, when we moved in here, this is a brand new build in South Austin. There was cameras on every streetlight. And I thought, cool, man, I travel a lot. My family will be safe when I'm gone. Then 2020 happens and I'm like, that's not for anyone's safety.
It's not for
safety. I can't believe
I
fucking bit that hook, line, and sinker. Amazon buys or Google bought Amazon's Nest and automatically put video cameras in it. This is a thermostat. They put video cameras in it without telling you there's a video camera in it. Immediately, the second they buy it, they put video cameras in it. It's a thermostat. What the fuck does there need to be a video camera in my thermostat for? Right? All of this goes into data and all this goes into monitoring, but it also goes into control. So break that down for people. A lot of people hear this from a guy like David Icke and they're like, pish posh, or they hear it from Alex Jones. And he sounds like a pro wrestler, so you say that's over the top, I don't buy it. But smart homes and smart cities are up right now. Like, this is what Lahaina's all about. This is what's happening in Austin's one of the first 1,000 cities. Austin wants this. It's a totally blue city, and it makes sense that they want it. But break this down for people because I don't think people fully grasp the seriousness of this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the whole climate change narrative it's a big power grab. It's about control. It's fairly obvious it's about control. But it's crazy how many people don't think it's about control. First of all, everybody wants a clean planet. Nobody likes litter on their street or in the ocean. Nobody wants to breathe smoggy air. 100% of people are against pollution and a dirty planet and a dirty environment and litter in their backyard. Of course. So that should go without saying. Nobody wants polar bears starving or floating on icebergs. The whole climate change narrative though is like, it's really visceral. It's got all this great imagery. This is why they cooked it up 50, 60 years ago, where it's like, oh man, like a polar bear floating on an ice cap. And just with its ribs sticking out, starving, it really gets to people's emotions, and that's how a lot of these things work. Is it's emotional appeal that kind of short circuits your brain into caring rather than using logic. But if you use logic and you just think about it, it's like we don't need cameras. Why you don't need cameras in your thermostats? And I think like the simplest way to think about it is like, why should I care about all this stuff? Your life is going to have to change. Your travel is going to have to change. The temperature you keep your home is going to have to change. Like you said, in Texas, also in Denver, it's happened in Denver. You see it in California. Gavin Newsom gets up there in the middle of the summer. He's sitting on camera and says, everybody's got to turn their thermostats to 80 degrees in their home because we're having a problem producing enough energy. and he's wearing a sweater, as obviously he's down around 70, 71 degrees in his spot. And of course, their lives aren't going to have to change. They're going to fly on their private jets. They can drive, the Rolls-Royce V12 engines. But all of our lives, they have to change. You have to drive these cars that you can't go more than a couple hundred miles, and then you got to sit and charge for 30 minutes. And I mean, the thing about the electric vehicles in here that I find so alarming is like you see the debanking, you deplatforming. You probably know people who've been, suspended off of Twitter, or maybe you've been suspended off of Twitter yourself, and you get put in the penalty box for a while, or maybe you get fully blacklisted, or maybe you get your bank accounts, as some of the Canadian truckers in the convoy did. You get your money stolen from your GoFundMes. So you've seen all this happen. It's not crazy or conspiracy when they have that capability. With the electric vehicles, imagine that you post something online that the state doesn't agree with. You're spreading too many red pills and you lose your driving privileges. So I would encourage people not to get an electric vehicle because it is connected to the grid, these smart grids, these 15-minute cities. I mean, you're right. It's like an open air prison. Just think about like what happened in Australia. They put people in quarantine in these quarantine camps. They want to keep everybody. The smart cities are about keeping tabs on everybody, making sure there's no opposition. This is all for your convenience. You got to live in a 100 by 100 100 square foot apartment, and you'll probably loot. A lot of these smart cities they're building with no spot to park cars. Why? They don't want you to park cars. They want you to walk. Cars equal freedom. A gas-powered vehicle equals freedom. You can go wherever you want. It's one of the beautiful things about America. You can drive across this great country, but that kind of freedom, you can't. It's hard to keep tabs on you. So, I mean, that's the electric vehicles I think are very suspicious. And then you see that's an example of how they use this climate change narrative to put in this method of control that is, we won't get out of it. If we go in, there won't be any coming out. You're not going to have people like rebuilding gas powered vehicles. Once they lock it down. So we've seen the lockdowns. I think the climate, the COVID lockdowns were kind of like a dry run, a test run for what they're capable of. And people did fight back. I think in the United States, especially, we resisted, and lots of people resisted all around the world. But there's also a lot of compliance. A shocking number of people complied with the rules and were
right. Well, that's how they were. That's exactly how they were raised. There's a brilliant book. Where is it? It's right behind me somewhere. Let me see if I can find this damn thing. I just threw it in there. I've mentioned it here on the podcast before, The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larken Rose. This is absolutely phenomenal. It's a very short book. It's a must read, must listen. And it just breaks down, how we're taught to behave. We're taught to listen to authority, and you'd say it, of all the things that are wrong with the school system, that's probably the most important piece of it. Is that you don't push back, you don't ask too many questions. Same thing in church. If you're raised in church, don't ask questions. If did God create, if all knowing, why would God create a gay person? If you're gay, why do you go burn in hell? Why is that worse than something else? Where you could just repent. There's a whole bunch of shit there, but same kind of playbook, right? Step in line, do what everyone says. This is the correct answer. Just memorize that. Don't learn how to think for yourself. Just memorize what we want you to know. And then it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense why so many people were like, all right, cool. Tell me what to do, doctor. Tell me what to do, CNN.
Yeah. So I had heard of the Internet of Things like years and years ago. Did not know that it was a World Economic Forum term. I think maybe a guy, one of the keynote lecturers, I think it was in the 90s, first coined the term of this thing called the Internet of Things, which is basically every smart device. I mean, everything can be an internet-enabled device. I talk about in the book, your washing machine, of course, the wearable tech like your smartwatches, Apple Watches. I've got a litter box for a cat that's an internet-enabled device. I got the feeders that are internet-enabled devices. And all of these devices in our life are becoming connected to the internet. It seems harmless. It seems awfully convenient. I'm out of town. I can hit the feeder button. But where it's heading in this Internet of Things, the fourth industrial revolution is what Klaus Schwab calls it. It's coming for all of us. It is sort of apocalyptic in a sense. where as we see the AI, the artificial intelligence, the big data as being, it's been collected all these years, but they haven't had the means to really sift through it and nudge you into certain types of behavior. And so you'll start getting nudges. You see it with the thermostats in Texas and Colorado and California, where all of a sudden, without your consent, your house is too hot for comfort. You wake up sweating and you're like, what the heck? I didn't choose to do this. And then you won't have an option to opt out. You'll have clicked the I agree box and they'll start nudging you. Your car will say, power grid's overloaded. So maybe no weekend vacation to the lake this weekend. You think that all sounds conspiratorial and that can't be real. Go look at the World Economic Forum website. They're proud of it. They brag about it. And it's these big tech companies, the FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Microsoft. They are central to creating this. I mean, Bill Gates wanted to build the first truly smart city. He was going to do it in Arizona. It was going to be called Belmont. And, I think they barely broke ground on it, but it was going to be this, what is now known as a 15-minute city. Now they've kind of abandoned that because they realize they can turn every city into a smart city with a smart grid where your car, is going to have better emission. And it's all under the guise of saving the planet, but it's really about controlling you. It's the cameras on your streetlights, cameras everywhere. And you're like, well, they're not watching me specifically. I've got nothing to hide. That's what a lot of people say. I've got nothing to hide. It's not about them reading through your text messages or whatever. It's about them nudging you toward agreeing with their worldview that basically you should have no freedom. And it's a shocking number of people sort of agree with that worldview. Like, oh, well, I'm just going to bike everywhere. I'm going to ride a bike everywhere because I'm saving the planet. And slowly, the world gets smaller and smaller around you. And you just look at the World Economic Forum's website, look at the Fourth Industrial Revolution pages. They're openly bragging about how easy it will be, in so many words, to control your life, every aspect of it, and then that might bring us to the food. I'm glad to know that you're really into the food stuff, because I agree. I've got a new baby daughter and another child on the way. And it's really, I would eat a bunch of junk, but, as I look at what's going into my child's mouth, the food is poison. A lot of stuff is poison.
Yeah, and it's literally the thing that's building their body. I first started really grappling. I've had to understand that for myself from a performance standpoint, fighting in the UFC, and even post that. What does my longevity look like? How do I heal a fucked up brain that's been punched a lot? But nothing says it better than when you watch your wife's belly expand and you're like, damn, everything she puts into her body right now is contributing to, it's literally making the body. And in every emotional state, right, for better or worse, the fear that she might have around the world that this child's going to be born into, all of those things are flipping on and off epigenetic on-off switches, right? It's all a part of what makes that person a human. And then as they're young, that will continue to be the case until they're fully grown. And then it'll be replenishing that system they've built. I was thinking about what had happened, with the formula, and then all these philanthropists come to the rescue. You got Bezos and all these guys working on child formula. And it's like, how the fuck did this happen? What do you guys care about child formula, baby formula? It's very odd. And the same people that want to bring you fake eggs, same people want to bring you cell-based meat. And it's comical if you understand the science around regenerative agriculture, because the science has been out for a long time around how regenerative agriculture, Alan Savory, people like that, what that actually does will sequester carbon for up to 500 years. And it's feeding. That becomes the food for the soil. That becomes the food for the microorganisms. And that makes plants healthier. It makes the grasses healthier, which in turn makes the animals that we eat healthier. That whole cycle is a closed loop, and it's a beautiful closed loop. And it doesn't require us creating meat in a lab. And if you even look at meat in a lab, there's a carbon impact there. If carbon dioxide was the issue, if CO2 was the issue, you wouldn't be making meat in a lab, right? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. But people don't really want to connect the dots. They just say, oh, here's how we save the planet. Cows are bad. We know you still want to eat burgers, so we're going to make fake burger. And it'll taste just the same. It'll be just the same micronutrient-wise. Utter nonsense. It is absolutely not going to be the same thing. But pound for pound, they're not even near it, right? And you talked about this in the book, like how there's companies, they come and go, and they're, startups here and there, and they get a lot of money going their way, and they can't crack the nut on how you can make something as cost effective as the way Mother Nature does. And that actually probably makes sense in a lot of ways why they can't do that, because Mother Nature is doing it perfectly to begin with.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there's several, a lot of layers to all this stuff. And on maybe at the top of that layer is these guys are egomaniacs. They want to play God. I mean, at the end of the day, they want immortality. That's what they're working towards. That's what the mRNA is about. That's what the transhumanism and uploading your brain to the cloud and a lot of the brain computer interface stuff is. I mean, humans since the dawn of time have been afraid of death. That's the one thing that probably unites every single one of us, is that one day we're going to die. And that's a scary thought. Is it over forever? Is there an afterlife? And that's a question that even the billionaires have to grapple with. But when they have this kind of money and this power and the wherewithal to try to solve that, they think that they can. There's actually a great quote. It's in the book by a guy, Joseph Weizenbaum. I believe he's an MIT professor, who talks about like why these computer programmers have this God complex. It's because they build these entire worlds, and they code the programs that build a world like Facebook, or build a world like the Microsoft operating system, and they can fine tune and they can tinker with it, and it gives them this kind of inflated sense of self where I can possibly 3D print a steak and do something better than Mother Nature does it. And so that's kind of one layer to it, is just this God complex that they have. But I mean, then the thing that I think that this book does, and I don't see anywhere else, and I've talked about it before, but I think with the foods, we could really get into it, is the patents. The patents are this 20-year monopoly. I mean, in patent, in intellectual property, I mean, people's minds immediately glaze over just thinking about patent law. But a patent is essentially a 20-year monopoly. And an example I use is like the Viagra pill. Pfizer develops this pill it was supposed to be like a heart medication, but it turns out to have this amazing side effect. And it was a whole crony relationship how they got the FDA to like reverse approve their application for Viagra. They made, I think, like $80 billion with a B dollars off of the Viagra pill. And then after the patent expires, it becomes an open source technology. Everybody, can use the same drug combination to deliver the same result. And now you see, ads and stuff for $1 a pill, or, it used to be like, $70 or something a pill is effectively what it was like. Then it's $1 a pill. And this is like I mentioned, the Standard Oil and the Rockefeller. This is why I think they have a big problem with oil, is because it has become so cheap and abundant and easy to produce. There is no peak oil. There's an end. I mean, I don't want to say infinite supply, but at least for our needs, I mean, they keep finding new ways to get it out of the ground, and it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Well, guess what? Solar energy, wind energy, fusion cell technology, that can all be patented, which gives the person who develops it a 20-year long monopoly. And so energy is kind of the biggest industry here, that if they can get control of that, there can't be any wildcatters or Jed Clampetts in the solar and nuclear power industries. There are no wildcatter goes and strikes it out, and you and I could go invest in an oil well right now and possibly make a very sizable return. It's a very populist way of creating energy. Solar, not so much. It's very controlled. You need to have eminent domain. You need to have a very tight relationship with the government. So it keeps a lot of the competitors out. Same thing with food. I mean, agriculture is the probably number one industry since the beginning of human time. All of time, everybody worked in agriculture, and over time we've developed really efficient ways of getting nutrients into humans. And first with the seeds is probably where you see the patent. I mean, well, I guess the technology behind the plow and the cotton gin or whatever is where you'd see a controlled thing, but then those patents run out. The seeds is like where they sort of figured out that you can just tweak the genetics and you can patent a seed. The Rockefellers actually, in their green revolution, it was the 60s that they first realized that, oh man, we can develop these seeds that are very resistant to pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. And also they're very tolerant of the fertilizers, nitrogen, and these very, chemical DDT on the pesticide side. I mean, that DDT will kill you, and it will kill every other pest around. But they develop these crops, corn, rice, and et cetera, that can survive through the pesticides that are not good for humans. And they, there's been the Roundup lawsuits, $1 billion judgments against Roundup, which is a Monsanto product, which, by the way, Bill Gates was an investor in Monsanto.
Massive investor.
Massive investor in Monsanto. He's a huge investor in John Deere. We'll get into the technology stuff. John Deere is now using, they're very against right to repair and being able to fix your own tractors. So that's why they put computers in all the tractors. And now you can't do it without, paying for the update, the software update. That's where Bill Gates' tech kind of gets into everything. You got to pay for the upgrade. I mean, and the same thing with the boosters and the vaccines is like, rather than buy it once, why not make it a subscription-based model? And they're trying to make everything a subscription-based model. I mean, everything in your life. I mean, your car is good. You're going to have to subscribe in order to get the heated seat function and pay $10 a month for the remote start function. But anyway, back to the food. So the seeds were the first things that they really got patented, but now they're patenting the proteins. They're the Beyond Meats of the world and the Impossible Foods of the world. You see that Bill Gates has become a massive investor in these fake meat companies. And so on the one hand, while it's about control and they have a God complex and they think that they can maybe 3D print a delicious steak, on the other hand, it's about controlling it from a profit standpoint where if you patent the right protein chain, you'll be the only person who can make money off of food. And food is obviously a massive multi-billion, $trillion type industry worldwide. And the Dutch farmers, I mean, people have heard about the protesting Dutch farmers. The Dutch are, some of the best farmers in the world. Why were they protesting? And you kind of hear, it's about the emissions restrictions and the fertilizer, something about fertilizer. Bill Gates has invested in Bayer and Monsanto have invested in these synthetic fertilizer companies, and they claim it's all super healthy for the planet. But that time will tell, I guess, if it actually is, but they're extremely expensive. The fertilizers are patented. And so now the farmers, you can't use your tried and true fertilizers. You've got to use these new these new fertilizers that are owned and controlled by these huge corporations and people like Bill Gates. And so, and then we're not even getting into the question of whether it's good for you. I mean, I'm sure you could probably school me a little bit on how bad some of these fake meats are. There's the list of chemicals and ingredients in them is a mile long, and it's still
destroying the environment too. When you get into monocrop and monoculture and things like that, like this is if we're basing like the foundational principle of the argument is the environment, that's not a step in the right direction. Right. That's a far cry from a step in the right direction.
And that's
is it healthy for me? Is it comical? I mean, it's comically incorrect. It's one of the worst things you could put in your body. Whereas meat, as we've seen with people that do more primal based eating, carnivore diets and things of that nature, you can see lifelong illnesses with no cure vanish from a diet like that. And it's not right for everybody, but for a lot of people who've really kind of thrown their hands up in the air, taken 20 different medications, they switch over and all of a sudden meat starts to be this thing that they can easily break down. It gives them the micronutrient profile, especially if they're eating organ meat, and a lot of these other things fall away. A lot of their disease, a lot of their illness seems to go away. Replace that with something that's super high in oxalates, pesticides, lectins, anti-nutrients, things that are going to grab zinc and other micronutrients you need and shit them out. Like we're heading the opposite direction there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a level of science in here that you would probably be better to speak to that is past my understanding. But exactly, I mean, it's like the amount of chemicals you intuitively know it can't be good for you. And in the solutions section, I mean, it's not you get to the end of the book and it's kind of like it's a little daunting. It's how are we going to fight back against these? Effectively, they're trillionaires when you include their corporations in the World Economic Forum. I mean, what can little old me do? Well, 2 words I recommend: buy local. Buy everything you can local. I mean, we stopped even shopping at the grocery store and we found a local farm because your local farm does not want to ruin your community. Like if you can trust the farmer, because you see like ground beef, what's in that now, even like that you buy just at your regular grocery store. So, get everything as close to home as you can. Not these mass produced factory farms that are pumping them full of growth hormones and that are made by pharmaceutical companies. I mean, the relationship between the pharmaceutical companies and the food industry is a little unsettling. Yeah, because you just look at photos from the 1970s. There's obesity. You didn't see a fat person in the 1970s on the beaches in the United States, and now obesity is a huge problem in the U.S. So there's the food. There's something up with the food. On a scientific level, it might not be it might be hard for a non-scientist to understand how it works, but effectively, it's not good for you.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Well, let's keep rolling here. Dive into, digital IDs. People thought that came and went. Obviously, CBDCs is a term that's going to keep coming up until it's implemented. Really, I mean, until there's a push for that and a push back against it. Hopefully, the pushback is successful. I guess start digital ID 2020. I remember that was a thing. Then they pushed it back. You could see it at the airport. It was the first thing where, like, if you weren't paying attention to this stuff or following, the right news sources online on social media, I'd go to fly. I'd go to fly for work, and I'd see, ID 2020, and it would show all passports and identification cards will have to be up to date, and they'll have this certain thing there, RFID scannable, and basically it's going to be, your smart ID. And in that, they didn't get that through in time. The vaccine passport became the next wave where we could fast track this and make sure everyone has this digital ID. And from that, we could control what they're putting in their body. If they decided not to get a booster shot, they wouldn't be allowed to fly. This did happen in Europe. It did happen in Israel. They called it the Green Pass. Didn't end up happening here. I think Biden said he was going to let the corporations decide, like the giant air companies decide what they were going to do there. It was basically just like, we know what you want, but we're just going to say America's not into that right now, so I'm not going to fight. I got to pick my battles. Was the way that I took that from him. But there still is this giant push towards it. So break this down, because I think this is something that's not going away, and it is something that we for sure have to pay attention to, because this is another one of the big implements. If you could. If I'm making all my income digitally and I'm doing everything online, and you figure out through my digital ID that I'm the guy that's saying shit that nobody should be hearing, very easy to throttle the podcast, very easy to close down my means. No different than the truckers in Canada, but even a little bit more sinister than that. You just have no listens all of a sudden. You go from 20,000 listens an episode to 0. There's an issue there, right? That's not going to, sponsors aren't going to be happy with that. So break this down for people, because it is going to affect everyone as this gets rolled out.
Absolutely. It's happening now. I mean, you hear a lot of the talk about the CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies, and the digital ID, and people, it has gone away and it's not a threat. No, it absolutely is a threat. It will remain a threat. And even if they'll change the name. They always change the name. ESG has basically become kind of a toxic brand, but then they change the name to something else, and they just don't call it ESG anymore, or they just won't call it a CBDC. The Great Reset becomes a toxic brand. I mean, global warming became a toxic brand, and then they come up with a new one that's even better, climate change. And so you'll see, what effectively the CBDC, I think this is the end, is like when they can just, with a flick of a switch, shut off your account, take your money. And they can, but right now it requires a court order, and it's kind of hard to, it's not easy to go take someone's money out of a local credit union. But if the Fed can essentially put an expiration date on it'll be implemented through the Federal Reserve. That's who issues all of our currency. They've got Fed, the Fed coin or Fed now. They're working on programs to use decentralized and the blockchain. Blockchain is a great technology. This is why I kind of spell out this battle between the decentralized crypto is possibly the way out of this system of control where they can't control your money. Bitcoin, you got to give up your social security. It's not numbered in order to legally transact in Bitcoin. But the centralized currency, we've already seen kind of the shadows of what it could look like. So when anybody who donated to the Canadian trucker convoy, all of a sudden those names get leaked out, and the GoFundMe's and the crowd things, just the money it gets taken from people. You saw Kanye West is, there's plenty of people who've lost their banking access. Kanye West lost it. There's other people, and you could argue about whether it's justified or not. I don't think that you should be debanked for any reason, but and you see the corporations in concert with the government is how this is implemented. Same thing with the censorship. Is the government says, oh no, we're not debanking. It was the bank's decision, or it was Facebook's decision to deplatform you. And so that's that with the digital ID. There's all kinds of attempts. I mean, eventually there will be a digital ID, and they always sell it under some sort of, it's convenience. I mean, like the same thing with the Clear and the you turn over your biometrics to TSA and you can skip the line, and it's like, oh man, I'll save 20 minutes and give up all my biometric information. We'll I'm sure have a digital ID soon, but once the vaccine pass is kind of the best illustration of how it works. Now, just imagine there's not a pandemic, but you try to go to a restaurant and you show them your digital ID, and it's just like, can't enter. It will be a way to stop the opposition to these type technologies. I mean, to the regime, essentially. If you don't agree with the regime, if you post bad stuff, wrong think on social media, even if it's you have no reach, even if you've been effectively shadow banned or banned, they're still collecting that, and that you probably got to target a profile. We know that they have profiles built, and like what level threat are you to the regime based on what you say online, and that'll determine your access to essential goods and services. And I see the United States, and you could say we're never going to take it, and I would agree. You do not comply, etc. But that's why you see, I think, just this onslaught, whether it's the border or whether it's inflation, or maybe there's just, there's just a waging war against America, taking it down. Now we've got multiple world wars type. You got Ukraine, you got Israel and Gaza, Palestinians, and it's just taking all of this money and inflation. Inflation makes it so that your grocery bill is twice what it was just a couple of years ago. They're just slowly degrading America to a point where, you may not even have the will to not comply anymore. Just like, all right, forget it. I'll take it. I think, that's why America seems to be just under this constant attack from these global oligarchs, is they see America as the biggest threat in the world to compliance.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we see that too with the push, to go against any of the heroes. Douglas Murray really outlined that in the Madison Crowds, but in the War on the West, he really hammered home. What if we're going to take down statues? We really have to consider the pluses and the minuses of everything these people taught, and understand. Yeah, these were there. When the country was founded, there's a lot of shit that's disgraceful going on. There's a lot right now that's disgraceful that's going on. So we've only got a short time left here. You finish with mind control and the dystopian present, and then the end game. I'd love for you to just wrap this up in a beautiful bow in the best way possible, and leave us with something that we can hold on to, because I love this in your forward. A lot of times people die. I read the book Battle Hymn, and I was just like, oh, fuck, man, I feel sick to my stomach. And, one of the things you say in the beginning is like, you don't come across this information and it's not meant to take you down. This is meant to something that lifts us, that when we, the people, understand what is going on, we ultimately have the power that we've never lost. It's about reclaiming that power and taking it for ourselves. So I loved that. That gave me a lift as I went into this material as needed. But talk a bit about where you think this is heading, and what it is that we can really, wrap our heads around with the way forward.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it is daunting material. It's like, man, how are we going to fight back? But I mean, this is an informational arsenal, and you got to spread the word. You got to share the ammo with everyone so that they can fight back. Because we outnumber these guys 1,000,000 to 1 or more. So it's like you just non-compliance is in a way the solution, but it's also you got to become personally responsible. You got to be jealously guarding your attention, your kids' attention, not feeding them crap, both from the food perspective, but also from the information perspective. And so that's what a lot of these last chapters get into is the mainstream mind control is about how just tightly controlled our media is for like, left, right, and center. They're actually all on the same page. And it's kind of like professional wrestling. It's a little bit scripted. I think everybody's starting to get that. But then even, forever, the mainstream media companies, the big media conglomerates, that was for, the boomers in our previous generations, that was all they had. And so you got to kind of sympathize with the boomers a little bit. But, they didn't, that's all, there was no freedom of information. But then the big tech companies come in. So I talk about all the networks. I talk about Operation Mockingbird and how the intelligence agencies have sort of infiltrated or totally infiltrated mainstream media companies. I talk about like MSNBC. I didn't know this before I started researching it. Do you know the MS in MSNBC stands for Microsoft? So I
didn't know that too until I read it in the book, and I was like, boom.
Yeah,
wow.
So Microsoft National Broadcast Corporation. I mean, Bill Gates sold it off. Someone bought it out. I think it's like Comcast or someone who owns it now. But you see that, it's kind of been this thing that we've seen for a while. That was one of the first things I saw 10 years ago. Was like all of the media companies from ESPN to Disney are owned by 6 corporations. That's true today. It's the same 6 corporations. Comcast has really come on the scene, but then AT&T will buy, let's say, Time Warner or something, and then they'll own all the Time Warner stations. It's all owned by the same companies. It's all the same people going to the World Economic Forum. And the message, there's guardrails around what's acceptable. And certainly nothing in this book is acceptable. But we've kind of broken out of that, right? We've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, or so we thought. That was the promise of the internet, is that it's going to spread information faster and further than ever before. And everybody's going to just like have this great awakening because all the truth is immediately available at their fingertips. Well, one thing is there's so much information out there that it's almost like nothing's true anymore. I mean, like we're almost in this post-truth world where you can, mysourcesright.com somebody. And, there's that element to it, whereas there's so much information that it's just like hard to get to the truth. And if you're not a critical thinker, you're just going to look at the first few results on Google. I think it's something like 80% of people who use Google don't go past the first page. And so then you look at so what are these big tech companies allowing us to see? And it's only what they want to. I mean, obviously, duh. But like, where is that heading? It's like, I mean, if you can't find the truth, that's a very scary thing. That's why I think books, that's why I got into writing books. That's why Schweizer writes books, is books can't be rewritten once they're published. And that's why it's important to get a physical copy of every book, because you'll go and try to find the digital copy. And if it's not approved literature, it's gone. Amazon blacklists many books and you won't even know that you can't get the book online anymore. And so that the dystopian president, I mean, I had a lot of fun like researching. I mean, it's scary stuff. I mean, I'm kind of a psycho for thinking this is fun because, you got to laugh or else you'll cry when you read it. But I had to watch this Zuckerberg Facebook Connect conference where he describes the metaverse. And of course, he's very robotic and cringe as he's going through. And it's going to be so great how you can just interact with your friends and strap a device to your face. And a lot of people think like, oh, the metaverse, that's become somewhat of a toxic brand because it's, just who wants to have a 5-pound device on their face? And you see the hilarious videos of VR fails online, people punching their mom in the face or whatever. But then you look at Apple Vision Pro. I think Apple Vision Pro will do for VR what the iPhone did for smartphones. I mean, you always had Blackberries and you had, Palm Pilots and stuff, but it was never really very cool to have a Palm Pilot. The iPhone is like everywhere. Everybody's got an iPhone. I mean, people's backs are getting thrown out of alignment because of just craning down to be on your smart device. So you're kind of always in this digital world. The VR glasses, the Apple Vision Pros have kind of removed that where you're just looking at a screen so you can actually see through it. And then you see other wearable tech, and Microsoft, of course, is working on AR, augmented reality, not total virtual reality glasses, where you can you can take the internet with you wherever you go. You don't even have to use a device, and you'll never leave. This is something I kind of thought about when I was writing the book. We used to say BRB on instant messenger, be right back. Nobody says that anymore because we never leave. But with the metaverse and what's coming with this, with the Web3, and basically just it's kind of like Ready Player One, if you've seen that movie. I mean, we're all living in 15-minute cities with the bug paste, and because your reality is so crappy, then you'll just want to live in this colorful, beautiful world. I think that is where we're heading. I think you'll see plenty of people. We got this guy Yuval Noah Harari with the World Economic Forum. Maybe you've seen some of his clips. The guy is a total psychopath, where he says, people are going to be just drugged up and playing video games. And you're like, that sounds dystopian. That's why I call the chapter the dystopian present. It's like, well, it's the present. It's not a dystopian future. It's the present. I mean, millions of people are just drugged up and playing video games all day. And I think that's what they want, is a population who's just is not a threat in any way, shape, or form. And then you get into in this chapter. So I kind of open with the metaverse and what he wants to do with that. It's infinitely monetizable. I mean, one of the scenes in the Facebook metaverse event, Horizons event, is like it's like, this is so cool. You can actually connect with your friends in the real world who are looking through their glasses at this digital graffiti. So they're like in the real world, but then you see this digital graffiti. It's like you can tip the artist, and then in the video, the artwork starts to fade away, and they're like, what? It's going away. Where's it going? It's like, it's got an expiration date, so you got to pay again. And I think that's what the big NFTs are really all about, is where you can monetize something that is literally zeros and ones. It's digital code. But in this metaverse, you'll be able to spend all of your money buying the latest outfit or the coolest pair of shoes that are not even real. I mean, think about paying $70 for a pair of Jordans or something that are digital. I mean, that's so much more valuable. So it's definitely about the money, but I think it's also about the control. And then the thing that really just shocked me, and as I was writing, I was putting the finishing touches on it this spring or leading into summer, is the FDA approved Elon Musk's Neuralink for human trials. And so the Neuralink and the brain-computer interfaces, because Elon's point about Neuralink is, I mean, first of all, they bill it as like, oh, this will solve paralysis and it will help all of these things. That's the emotional component to kind of disarm you from being like, wait a second, you want to put a chip in my brain? It's like, no, this is just to help paraplegics and people with various spinal problems. But Elon's point is the point I sort of just made, is like, well, you're already hooked into, a digital world with your phone. I'm just removing the peripheral, so it's directly in your brain. So then you'll never have to leave. You can just send psychic text messages with your friends, or have the porn beamed directly into your brainstem. You won't even have to bother with a screen or an interface. I just think that's so. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea why, really, other than control, but why are we going towards this? And the fact, like, why, people are signing up for it. People are signing up to be the first humans to get brain chips. I think company BlackRock Neurotech, which is not to be confused with BlackRock, the financial behemoth, BlackRock Neurotech, I think, has got already 10,000 people who have put chips in their brains. And Neuralink, Elon Musk's company, we found thousands and thousands of animals have been euthanized because they're just rejecting the chip. Like monkeys, the monkeys that Elon is putting these chips into their brains. He brags like, oh, they're able to play Pong on the computer. They think something and it types. They find the monkeys in the cages chewed off their fingers and toes just because it's not natural, right? I mean, it should be obvious that putting a chip in your brain is not natural. It shouldn't be done. But Elon assures us that the monkeys are actually enjoying it. They're given a banana smoothie. And my question for Elon is like, will humans also be getting a banana smoothie after our trials? But that's that. And then I'll just close it out with the end game, because I've worked with Schweizer. His last 3 books have had major China themes, and everybody kind of like, China is like, the social credit score system. I really get into, I get into like China is actually a creation. I mean, the CCP is in a lot of ways a creation of the West, specifically the Rockefellers. I mean, the Rockefellers went over to China before, like in 1887, and they were selling their first kerosene and heating and lamp oil in China 100 years before the Chinese Communists, 70 years before the CCP was even created. I mean, certainly before Mao's Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And so the Rockefellers have been there since the beginning. David Rockefeller, I found all these great like op-eds and kind of buried pieces that David Rockefeller wrote in the 70s talking about how wonderful the Chinese model is. And there's like, yeah, there's some human rights violations, but man, they are efficient. They can get things done, as quickly as they want. So what you really start to see, and it's like, we got to be careful when we talk about like we need to do this in China and like China's going to eat our lunches. Like who's we, who's us? Because a lot of people think America is just this like one unit and we're all together. It's like, no, the ruling class does not see China as an adversary, certainly not as an enemy, but not even an adversary or a competitor. They see China as a friend, and they've been developing that friendship with China for 60 years. I mean, Kissinger is in the book. Kissinger was, by the way, Klaus Schwab's mentor. I talk about that in the World Economic Forum chapter. Kissinger went over to China in the 70s. He was a Rockefeller agent, actually. And they're the ones who brought China into the 21st century and turned it into this outsourcing mecca where they can get slave labor to build all of the cheap products to bring back to the United States. But I see China as basically a sandbox. Like, I mean, computer programmers, talk about, it's called, like, the term is a sandbox, where they can develop a program like in a sterile environment with no oversight, Wuhan lab, maybe, like no oversight. You come up with the technology over there, you use whatever sort of slave labor or humans test subjects that you need, and then you can implement it worldwide. That's the social credit score system. And so you see like these big tech companies, I mean, going back to the Rockefellers, they've been working with China. And so like China is like the practice run. And that's why, people are starting to get that, like, oh man, this social credit score thing, they're trying to bring it here. Like one other piece of evidence that I was just shocked to find is like you hear about the China's one child policy. And it's like, oh, these brutal, terrible Chinese, it's so like they're the ones, they didn't come up with that. The one child policy was the Club of Rome, who is a precursor to the World Economic Forum. It was the Chinese officials came and got schooled by these controligarchs in the West, and the controligarchs in the West taught China that actually it's good for you to only have one child, which is totally false, because like, the more your population grows, the more your GDP grows, the more resources you have, human resources in your country. So it's not good to control your population. It was not in China's interest, as they're now seeing. I mean, all around the world, these demographic crises from not having enough offspring are a problem. So that the end game is basically, they want a system like China, and they've worked very hard to make the Chinese system work, the controligarchs. And that's where I close out the book. And then with the hopeful recommendations, again, it's not a beach read. This is not a book to enjoy yourself, but it is a book to give you the information and the ammunition you need to share with your friends and family, to wake people up. And the number one things you can do, I mean, it's what can I do? I mean, take care of yourself, your health. Make sure you're eating the right foods. Make sure you're putting the right thing, right things into your mind. Not just like all of the. My mom called it mind Twinkies. I grew up, I didn't have TV, and I'm very grateful for my. When I was a kid, I hated it, but I'm very grateful to my mother who wouldn't let me eat the mind Twinkies. So. Don't be just binging Netflix all the time. You gotta stay healthy and wake up your friends and family.
Fuck yeah, brother. Well, it's been absolutely excellent having you on. I will for sure get Peter Schweizer on for his next one, and anything that you've got coming out, I'd love to have you on. I'll share you with my friends and hopefully get you on a nice run of podcasts. I appreciate you coming on mine first.
You're the man, Kyle. Thank you.
It's been awesome, Seamus. Where can people find you online? Follow you on Twitter. We'll link to that in the show notes. Is that the main space?
Yeah, I'm at Seamus Bruner on all platforms. Twitter's probably the one or Twitter for X, formerly Twitter, whatever. That's probably the one I personally use the most, but I got Facebook, everything, I got a website, SeamusBruner.com, and then the book you can get at all retailers, probably, whichever one you prefer. I don't recommend if you can get it somewhere not Amazon, that'd be great. Bezos is on the cover. I understand that everybody's got an Amazon account. So as soon as you buy the book, deactivate your Amazon.
Awesome, brother. Well, thank you again, and we'll chat soon.
All right, take care.